Hello, California State University, Sacramento, singers up to the first meeting of the semester, spring 2022 of the Disabled and Non-Disabled Alliance here at Sacramento State. If you're not a Sacramento State student, that's also fine. Welcome in. Um, this is, some of you will know, many of you will be relatively, I suspect, new to the club. And you may have not have heard the spiel yet, so I'll give a little bit of it. This is a club that is focused on education and disability. It's basically a club for the fostering of community between disabled and non-disabled people, but where the focus is on disability. It sort of exists, you could say, to fill that need for that space on campus, whereas it doesn't seem to have existed before. So here we are. We're doing a thing. It's I think first and foremost a political project, but currently we're hoping to get those activist efforts more off the ground. So for now, we're focusing mostly on the sort of education and awareness side of things in order to get disability more in the conversation, so as it does not get left out. So yeah, this is our first meeting of the semester, as I say, and its titled is an unofficial guide to services for students with disabilities. If you are not familiar, that's the SSWD, that's the agency on campus at Sacramento State that is specifically for getting reasonable accommodations to students with disabilities or disabled students, same diff. And this is meant to be a sort of encapsulatory tutorial on that whole enterprise, that institution, and the process for getting accommodations when and if they're needed. So we're not diving right in, but I'll just go to the announcements page. Yeah, so the club has a number of projects going on, and we wanted to bring some other things to your attention as well, just in case. Through Our Lens is a podcast that was started by the Disabled and Non-Disabled Alliance very recently, and I say recently, literally episode 2 is out now. And as well as the KSSU.com blog series, which is also part of Dana's content creation outreach project. It's mostly a publicity thing we're doing to bring Dana to the people's attention, but also the issues that we're sort of discussing, because I can't help but get political currently. I'm actually not familiar with this case that's in the announcements page, so I'm going to skip over that one and go to the other ones for now, and then
I put that there.
Go ahead. I was going to say, have you take over?
Yeah. The Payan versus LACCD, or LA Community College District. Basically, the gist of it is a group of blind students sued the college district because their materials were not accessible to screen readers. They did win their case twice, but the district is not backing down, and they're looking to take the case to the Supreme Court on the grounds that they should not have been able to sue in the first place because the discrimination was not intended. Obviously, that is a whole bunch of hogwash, and if they succeed, it will basically undermine the Americans with Disabilities Act as we know it, because the act covers unintended discrimination. That's the whole point. A building not having a ramp is unintended discrimination, but still discrimination and inappropriate nonetheless, right? So there is stuff you can do to support this. There is a petition that is linked in our Discord. I can put it in the chat later. And then the UDAC efforts. UDAC is a committee at Sac State University Disability Advocacy Committee. They're currently still in the formation stage. They need to get approved before doing anything. But if you are interested in making our campus a more accessible place, hit me up and I'll make sure you get connected once we're up and running.
Absolutely. I have to say, appreciate how you have to sort of work within the institutions to get anything accommodated. That's kind of the theme for tonight, like how to work within the institutions. So for sure, these UDAC and the case will turn out to be stories where people did their best to work within the rules to get things to be better. Okay, and these are more general, but Sac State's Yeah, sexist in-person period is about to start again. If you didn't haven't been apprised of that just yet, some of your classes I would check with your individual professors about how they'll continue to be structured, because some of them will have switched to from like a hybrid model to an all online model for the rest of the semester, regardless of whether or not campus operations keep going. Some of them will genuinely be all on campus from now on. It's going to be a little bit different for every class, but for every single one of them, I would recommend, if you're on campus, to keep on masking. It's as far as from my understanding, it's literally the law at the moment. But yeah, it's generally worth doing regardless of that. And then the official schedule was literally just published for the rest of the semester's club meetings. And I say that because we've had some like behind the scenes difficulties trying to figure out when the meetings are to take place. Currently, we're settled on a sort of alternating day schedule where it's like I want to say the first Thursday and the third Friday, if I'm not mistaken, of each month. I would just run through that schedule and like mark your calendars each individual day. And whatever meetings you're available for, please do attend them. That's my strategy anyway.
Yeah. So lastly, we're looking for guests for our future episodes for the podcast.
Yes. Sorry.
So if you want to kind of get into the conversation, it's just us talking about like whatever topic we want. It's really free format, and you can be a guest. Just kind of reach out to us, and we record every Friday. But if that doesn't work, then we can plan around your schedule, like if needed.
Yeah, for sure. The recording sessions are like, if you'll probably hear this in the podcast, they're not at all scripted. I say we're good at podcasting, and in fairness to that statement, we do already have a slogan. It's called "Where's the Ramp?" It's a bad reference, but I like it because I made it up. Anyway, yeah, please, we are hoping to get guest speakers, and the members of the club are the best guest speakers we could ask for. Okay. So this is basically a summation of tonight's agenda. I hope and I believe that Dr. Vance will be joining us to do this tutorialization.
She's here. Yeah,
yes,
she's here.
Perfect. Okay, I think my chat's covering her. But awesome. So we'll have her hop in pretty soon here to do the necessary work of tutorializing us. For those who don't already know the ins and outs, and even for those who do, because there are going to be some ins and outs that she's privy to that you are not. So this is just the tonight's agenda. But first, this thing. Brian, did you want to?
Yeah, I can. So like William said, we have a guest speaker, Dr. Vance. She is the director of SSWD since 2018. But we kind of want to hear from you now. We're kind of doing an icebreaker right now. So we kind of want to know what your name is, your pronoun, and your major. And like, what is your favorite thing to do at Sac State, like when there's in person? And if you haven't been on campus yet, just kind of guess.
I think that's everyone, but do shut me up if I'm wrong. That applies in general. Okay, so I think with that we can reasonably go on to our sort of presentation, and I'll let Dr. Mary Vance take the wheel from here.
Hello, everyone. Back again. You know what? I'm wondering about being able to share my screen here a second. Am I able to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to see if I'm going to be able to, do I want to continue? Yes, I do want to continue. I don't know if this is going to pick up, though. That's the problem. Are you able to see this? The graphic?
Yeah, it's coming through.
Do you see the graphic here?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to show you is about SSWD, which is currently we're still staying with the name, even though Rion knows that I've not really liked this name, but we'll live with it for what it is worth for right now. But what you see is a graphic that is now going to be the SSWD's graphic, which until now we didn't have one. And so let me explain to you what you are looking at. What you see is a triangle shape in the corner, and there's a history to the triangle. When you know about the history of the, if you come to the presentation on February 14th regarding at the convocation, you'll learn a little bit more about the history of the intersection of racism and ableism. And here what you see is a triangle which has a historical root with Nazi Germany and the concentration camps. Oftentimes people don't think about the connectivity between racism and ableism. And it began in the United States when you start talking about eugenics. The eugenics movement was about trying to create and maintain a pure race. And in the eugenics movement, people who are considered to be unworthy of being a part of this ideal race and were being sterilized. And so people who were prisoners, women in particular, people of color in particular, were oftentimes sterilized against their will so that they would not procreate and would not be contributing bad genes into society. The Nazi Germany during World War II took up that concept of eugenics and selectivity of genes, and they went a step further to go into the level of extermination. If you're familiar with World War II and that period of time when the Jewish individuals had to wear Star of David, the history of the pink triangle comes from the Star of David. When you take the Star of David apart, there are 6 points to the star, and each point was a triangle. And so we are familiar with the pink triangle. We're familiar possibly with some of the other triangles. What you're less familiar with is that there was a black triangle. When the prisoners were being unloaded from the trains at the concentration camps, oftentimes people who had disabilities never even made it to live long enough to be designated a triangle. They would be exterminated immediately. But there were some individuals that had disabilities that were allowed to live, in particular twins and those that were considered to be good possible workers and laborers, and also those, of course, that would be great for medical experiments. So what you see here is a triangle symbol that is of the school colors, but also at the very tip of the triangle on this side, it's black. That is representative of the history and the roots of understanding racism and oppression and understanding the history of how disabled individuals were treated during the early 1900s. And to some degree, hanging on to that legacy, we wanted to honor that and also to not forget the black triangle. What you also see is a person in a wheelchair who is trying to break out of the triangle, as in breaking barriers. You will also see that the wheel of the wheelchair is a sunflower pattern. This pattern is a symbol that is starting to gain popularity nationwide, mostly in the UK for now, but gaining traction in the United States and other areas as a symbol representative of individuals that have non-visible disabilities. Behind you, you see multicolor hue of colors. These colors represent the rainbow flag, but also all the other colors that might be relevant and that pertain to the different races and different orientations. And so rather than having stripes, we determined that we would just have, instead of filtered color background, that would be representative. And of course, the honeycomb pattern that you see very likely is a Sac State original. So I wanted to introduce that concept so that you had a little better idea of what's going on with SSWD in terms of trying to be aware and sensitive to the different populations that SSWD serves. And now we got this other slide presentation here. I can kind of go through it a little bit, but if you have any questions, Rian did a very good job of outlining what SSWD does and what the processes are. So basically what happens is if someone wants to register for service accommodations with us, they do need to provide medical documentations. That is because Sac State and most public universities have a duty to be able to ensure that we have processes in place for how we determine accommodations. It would be the easiest thing in the world for us to just say, you want captioning? You want this? You want that? Fine, we'll give it to you. But the first time you say you say no is the first time then we get into big trouble because we haven't really utilized a process for screening and determining appropriate accommodations. So it is important that when you apply to SSWD, that you submit all relevant medical documentation. And then once you've submitted the application, the documentation, you meet with one of our staff and access coordinator, who then will sit down and talk to you one-on-one through Zoom now or in person later, to review your documentation, to discuss what are the accommodation needs that you believe you may need, and then to also discuss what would be appropriate academic adjustments and alterations that may need to be done in order to make sure we provide you the accommodations you require under the law, ADA. All right. And then every semester you have a responsibility to submit the letter of accommodation, which right now is just going through our online portal. And it's online and it's not internet, but it is an electronic system that is very secure. And so all you have to do is go into that system and request your accommodation letter, and an email notice is sent to the faculty member. They can go into the portal and then they can retrieve that letter, and they can look up class by class what students have disabilities, what in terms of what accommodations they may require, and then they can organize and make sure that the accommodations are there. No more having to plow through emails and try to figure out where was that letter and all of that stuff. It's all there at a moment's retrieval. And you as students have the ability to retrieve it at any point as well. And so we now have a better tracking system. So when a student says, oh, I never got my accommodations, we're able to track back to find out when did you request it, when the faculty was sent it, and then we know at what point the faculty member was responsible for making sure that the accommodations were provided for you. And so this takes care of a lot of ambiguities. And I'm embarrassed to say that I taught a course 2 years ago here on campus. I only had 6 students. 3 of them handed me letters of accommodation, and I promptly lost them. If I didn't know, because they handed it to me physically, and I stuffed it in with all my papers as I was leaving class, and I was super embarrassed, but absolutely, this is reality. So can you imagine the poor faculty member with 30, 40, 50, 100 plus students trying to keep track of your accommodation? Is pretty rough. So this way, that takes care of that. Faculty can now put the exams in there, and they don't have to worry about floating through cyberspace. They just upload it into our system, and then we're able to download it and provide it for the students. And after the student has taken it, then we're able to upload it back in the system. Faculty have it back again. Again, no more getting exams lost. And we did have examples and situations where we were relying on campus mail. It would take days for an exam to be delivered from the library over to one of the campus buildings, which is ludicrous. So, but now it's just instantaneous. So you do have a responsibility to hand to the faculty member every semester. I mean, you don't hand it, you have to activate in the system that the system sends to your faculty member of that semester, a individualized, personalized letter of accommodation addressed to that faculty member for that particular class. Accommodations are case by case. So you may need double time or time and a half for one class, but not need accommodations for another class. This is why the letters are different for each faculty member, and it's not a generic. And it's also why every semester accommodations need to be reviewed. In other words, we won't review them once we've approved them. Those are your accommodations as they are. But if you need changes, that's when you need to contact us and talk to one of the access coordinators. These are some common accommodations, depending on your disability, depending on what your required accommodation needs are, you will be provided this. We have all learned that through the pandemic, Zoom is a wonderful feature. You're able to, regardless of your disability or not, have access to full text and subtitles if the instructor or the host activates the full text and the subtitle feature, which is really great. You also can get videotapes and audio tapes if you want. Again, if the host or the faculty member activates it and shares it with you. This is really a great innovation. As we go back into in-person classes, these features may not be available because they won't be necessarily using Zoom, But if it is a requirement that you have audio recording or that you need to have transcripts because of your audio processing, whatever, these are accommodations that our department would approve, again, based on discussions with you and your accommodation requirements and your documentation. Housing, as is on the slide here, is something that you need to apply for every year when you fill out your contract with housing on campus. However, housing accommodations are determined by SSWD. So we are the ones who review any accommodations that may be necessary or needed for housing room arrangements, as well as for ESAs. So ESAs are emotional support animals. And some of you who live in the residence halls would be very aware that there are some students who do have animals and others who don't. And SSW and campus, this campus is a pet, is a no pet campus, of course. But if you have a required need for an emotional support animal based on psychological or other medical documentation, then SSWD reviews that and then we approve. However, when that is approved, you have responsibilities. And right now we do have a situation in the residence hall where a student has not been particularly conscientious about cleaning up and maintaining good care of their animal. And the student is in the process possibly of maybe losing their animal, as in they will have to have their animal housed somewhere else because the handler has not demonstrated responsibility for their animal, and this is unacceptable. So when we are approving animals in the residence hall, it's not really just about the student, but we also are very concerned and caring about the animals as well. And so that would be a little bit about the housing situation. Priority registration is considered an accommodation. It is not a right. And for those of you who transferred from a community college, you may be aware of the fact that priority registration was just automatically given to anybody who registered with the Disability Service Office, but that is not the case at public four-year universities as a whole. And we don't treat it as being an entitlement. We treat it as being an accommodation that if the student requires it, then that is provided. And it's provided really under rare circumstances, as in a student maybe has chemotherapy or has to have some form of life-threatening treatment that can't be scheduled around, and they do need to schedule classes around those treatments. But otherwise, priority registration is not treated as being something that is going to be given to you just because you're afraid you're not going to get classes you want or something like that. It is because it's directly linked to your disability, and your disability accommodations do require that you have this accommodation to ensure the balance of your medical health, personal health care, and also your academic in registration. I don't know what other slides are. Was that it then, William? Let's
Believe
see.
that there are more. Yeah.
That
So
was very thorough. I
Yeah.
apologize.
yeah, no problem. I think it's good. You know, I was just talking off the top of my head. So, and I did skim through real quickly. The one slide that I would just be cautious about for all of you to be aware of is, of course, Rion did provide a slide on all the different kinds of accommodations and things like that. And I just want to caution you on the fact that although those accommodations exist, we are not a department where you just come on in and check off what you want. You know, again, we are the ones that determine with you in a one-on-one discussion what would be appropriate given your accommodation. So let me give you an example. I have a physical disability. I use an electric scooter. I had polio as a child when I was in South Korea, which is where I was born. So I'm an immigrant and I was adopted. So I was raised in the United States. I also have a non-visible disability. I have a hearing loss. I'm deaf in one ear, partial hearing in the other. But let's say that William is my access coordinator in SSWD, and I have my physical disability from polio, and I have my hearing disability, and I come into William and I say, William, I need to have double time on exams. William asks me, well, why do you need that? And I'll say, well, because I just, you know, I get nervous and I kind of like, you know, blank out. And I think the extra time would really help me out because, you know, I just feel like it would just be really helpful. And William says, okay, I can tell that you had polio. I can tell that you have hearing loss. So where is it that you would require extra time? Why? How is it connected to your hearing or your physical disability? And I would be like, but well, geez, William, like I have a disability, like, why can't I have it? And William would say, well, because what we try to do is we try to provide and approve accommodations that are directly connected to your disability and the conditions and the fundamental limitations, the functional limitations based on your disability. So unless you're able to provide documentation that says you have some kind of a processing disability, slower processing or something cognitive or neurological that would require, additional time, that really is not an accommodation that would be necessarily appropriate for your disability. However, making sure that classes are all at an accessible location for you, making sure that faculty use microphones and that you have priority seating makes total sense. Okay, so that would be just an example of how a discussion might go between a student and an access coordinator. Rian, you have any questions or anybody else?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that I had that list there because I feel like there are a lot of students who know they need help with things, but they aren't really sure what things they need help with or if the problems they even have can be accommodated, or like they'll just assume that there aren't any accommodations for that and so they won't seek help. But in reality, you can get accommodations for this and please do seek help. So
yeah,
I just kind of had that list there to say, oh, if this is something that would really help you, then look into getting connected with SSWD.
Yeah, I would just change that
yeah.
to say what accommodations may be available. And so, for example, we do not provide padded chairs. What we provide are chairs that are a bit more ergonomic, for different size students in particular. But they're not chairs that go up and down. They don't have lumbar support. These are just chairs that are different from the stable, stagnant, pupil chairs that you find in the basic classroom. Calculators, for example, are not always approved. So someone may want a calculator, but the class itself is such that it requires the ability to do basic arithmetic and to be able to learn how to calculate in your head or at least on paper. And so we would very, very carefully review the documentation to ensure that the access to a calculator would not be a fundamental alteration for the curriculum, and so, but we do understand that if a person has a processing or a cognitive disability that is unable to really analyze a problem, but they do know how to follow the steps to get the answer, but not necessarily know how to do the steps in a way that gets to be, that they can read it. It's kind of complicated, but there are times when the calculator makes sense. And then there are times when the calculator doesn't make sense. So I would just make that one adjustment, Rihanna, before we, when you, as you're posting it, just say what accommodations may be available. And of course, that would be based on, again, the conversation and the interactive process with our office. But some of these are very, very common. The use of audio recording, really, really common. I just find it so ludicrous and funny how faculty will kick back and push back on that. They get so worried about it. And you and I, we all know that any one of you could sit in a classroom and surreptitiously turn on your phone or your whatever and record whatever and take it out of the room. But the student who is authorized to have audio recording from SSWD needs to sign a document, an agreement that says that they understand how to use it properly. And so we tell faculty, you don't need to worry about the SSWD student who is going to audio record. Because if they violate the terms of the agreement for you being able to audio record, it could be a student conduct matter. What should really worry you are other students who don't have that audio agreement, because if they audio record and they post it on YouTube or wherever else, we don't have the ability as an institution to prosecute or to hold them accountable or to take them to student conduct. So it's a very interesting concern that faculty have, which is really very unfounded when it comes to SSWD students. Other questions or thoughts about accommodations? Now, because of COVID, for example, we're getting a lot of interesting requests coming through. And so one thing that it might be helpful for you all to understand a little bit is that because of the fact that Sac State is a brick and mortar campus, as in the campus is accredited to be a face-to-face in-person campus, the concept of online curriculum is not really part of our accreditation process, and the curriculum is not designed to be online. What happened was that faculty were forced, because of the pandemic, to do a quick pivot and to try and create some way to be able to communicate and teach as many concepts as possible through remote, but that is not the optimal way of learning and being prepared for whatever the program is trying to prepare you for. So that's why then students who are coming in now saying that they want to have all their classes be online, part of that responsibility really is on them, because if they registered for classes that were designed to be online, but they had the first couple of weeks, if they signed up for classes that were designed to be in person and they had the first couple of weeks of online, and now we're going in person, really it was on them that they should have registered for classes that were strictly online and not have to go through this pivot process themselves. On the other hand, we do know that there are students who are medically fragile. And if that's the case, then again, they should have tried to get classes that were all online, or maybe because a pandemic is still so fluid and so unpredictable, maybe they might need to sit the semester out, because we are an in-person, brick and mortar campus. And that is the way the faculty had developed a curriculum to begin with. That's how accreditation, licensure, all these other requirements were designed to be done. And so what was done during the pandemic was really just to try and just keep the process of education moving, but was not providing the optimal curriculum.
And would you say as well that that would be a thing to bring up with your with your access coordinator? I
Oh,
believe
yeah.
that's the term. That if you have some concern about what classes were available to you and to the extent to which they're online, that kind of thing.
Right. And here's a limitation. SSWD doesn't provide academic advising. So if someone needs advice in terms of what classes to take, what's open and what should they do, then they really need to go to the Academic Advisement Center or go to their academic program department to get that advice on courses. But certainly what we will do, though, if a student is registered with us and they have concerns about a class, we certainly will check it out, but it's not going to necessarily always result in a happy ending. For example, we have a student right now who who has a non-visible disability. It has to deal with her bowels. And so she's obviously very concerned about wanting to be able to take all her classes online, in the comfort of her home. She has been accustomed to classes being online because that's how she came in. But that's not the way Sac State's designed. If we had not had the pandemic and the same student came in with the same concerns, what we would have done is we would have maybe moved classes around so that she would have been located near a restroom. And so that is what we would plan to do again with this particular student. But she's been fighting to have all the classes online, but the faculty are pushing back because the program that she's in does require in-person small group, all sorts of other activities that can't be replicated in an online Zoom format when everyone else is in person. So there are just some things that the quality and the capability just will not work, and it becomes a fundamental alteration.
Okay. I'll take a second here just to advise. Maybe we should have this PowerPoint posted, and it is a PowerPoint posted to the Dana Discord for people to reference, because there is lots of information here that will be useful if and when you want to go to SSWD for assistance. But I think it might be helpful if we skip ahead to the helpful resources slide and run through that quickly. So for the thereafter we can have the discussion portion of the evening where it's more free form and communal and all that good stuff.
Okay. Exam accommodations. All right. So exam accommodations are part of SSWD. The Accessible Technology Initiative is part of the IT department. So that is a technology department, the college there. So there's a lot of other resources as well for SSWD. I would also include, of course, CAPS, counseling and student health services would be helpful as well for some students. CARES might be another resource, CARES, because they provide emergency housing. There's been, they provide quite a bit of financial support for students who've been impacted negatively by the pandemic. So CARES is another source. The Student Center in Lawson on the first floor is also a very good resource. That's a one-stop. So we oftentimes send our students, students who come to us about advisement or financial aid or whatever questions, we send them to the one-stop, the Student Center, rather than sending them out to the registrar's office or to financial aid, because the one-stop staff, they're really well prepared and trained to be able to hunt down. And we have a liaison there that's really very good about working with our specific department, participants. So the student ones, they're called the Student Center on the first floor of Lawson. When you walk in the main door, it's to your left, that glassed in area there. So those would be a couple more resources I would add in.
All right.
Thank you. We'll make sure to put those in the slides.
Yeah, you will. I guess sort of next thing that we kind of want you to go over is what if the process goes wrong? Like, for example, like for professors.
Yep.
What
Yes.
happens if they don't listen?
So obviously, as a student, your responsibility has been to make sure they have your letter of accommodation. And if you find that your first quiz is coming along, you probably want to check and remind them that you have this particular accommodation. If they blatantly refuse, and we've had a couple cases like that where faculty have not read their email. Mostly this tends to be part-time faculty, the lecturers who don't read their Sac State email. But if if faculty don't provide the accommodations, you need to come to us immediately. Don't wait until the end of the semester. You got to come to us immediately, because we cannot do anything reactively. We have to be working with it at that moment. We will contact the faculty. We'll find out what's going on. And we will make sure that you have that accommodation. We are not advocates. We are not advocates for SSWD students in terms of, we're not the ones that you should come to if you're going to go, for example, need to have a support person at some hearing or something like that. We're not really your first go-tos for that, but we are the advocates for any accommodation we approve. We're going to fight for you to have those. We didn't approve those lightly. Those are ones that we're committed to making sure that you have them. And if you are not getting them, and if someone is being stubborn and not providing it, they are non-compliant. And if they're non-compliant, that means that could run the risk of having the institution, Sac State, non-compliant. That's not a good situation. And so quite honestly, I don't mean to brag, but SSWD, myself, we have great credibility with the president and with the cabinet. And if we go to a dean and say, you have a faculty member who's not compliant, who has refused, who has not provided an accommodation, it's not going to be pretty.
I have a question. I have a couple friends who use SSWD services who have encountered a situation where their accounts were either flat out denied or ignored by the professor during finals week, which impacted their ability to take finals or finish up the assignments or the last couple of days of class. And they felt so pressured about it that they felt there wasn't enough time left to reach out for help and address the situation with the professor, and that it would be a better use of the time to just try to stick through it and wait until winter or summer break. What would you advise to those students?
I would say as soon as you know that you did not get your accommodation, you need to come to us. I mean, even if you took the exam and you did not get the accommodation during that exam, you need to come to us right away. We've had a couple of situations where faculty have not provided the student the accommodations during finals, and we have chased them down. And we've had the dean and we've had the Office of Faculty Affairs all breathing down on that faculty member. And, basically, some of them have lost their contract. So it can get pretty serious. But the thing is that for the student, it may ultimately result in sometimes what'll happen is faculty member will be forced into not including that final in the ultimate grade. So if a student's been otherwise doing well, but then they didn't do well in the final because they didn't get the accommodations that they had were entitled to, and they'd given the faculty member the letter of accommodation, due notice, all of that stuff. The faculty member is responsible for making it be good. And so the faculty member needs to then work out an arrangement where either the student gets to take over the final, and the faculty member may have to recreate a whole new different final specifically for that student. So the student has an opportunity to take it underneath the appropriate circumstance and arrangement, or the faculty member may decide to do something else regarding the grade process or the whatever. So those are things that, SSWD will sit in on and will work with the student and the faculty member to ensure that there is some form of process there for ensuring the student is not being disadvantaged because the faculty was being negligent.
Thank you. Maria, I saw you had your hand raised. What's up?
Yeah, so I'm just curious, because I'm hearing like there would be consequences for someone who doesn't follow this, but how should someone, I guess if a student came to you and said like, I don't, they don't want a retaliation for coming forward and saying that the professor is not accommodating them accordingly or whatever, are they ensured that they're not gonna be, I guess, singled out in the future, or being graded
Oh,
more
you're right.
harshly or something like that?
You're talking retaliation, and of course, retaliation is absolutely not appropriate. And that, of course, is also non-compliant. And actually, William, then you might want to add in a couple more resources, and that would be Office of Equal Opportunity, as well as the bias response team. So bias response is a new initiative that was born over the summer and now exists as of now. So students and faculty can go to the bias response director, Catherine Betts, BETTS, and they can go to her and they can complain about the fact that they were in a situation where they felt that the faculty member had not provided them the accommodation, or the faculty member had said something inappropriate, or they just want to report that this happened and they were not comfortable and it wasn't good. That is a bias response team. Now, if you are in a situation where you feel like you're being retaliated against, that you suffered a negative consequence for having called attention to the fact that you require accommodation, or something that would be considered a violation of executive orders, which are policies from the CSU system. And you can go to the Office of Equal Opportunity and get a better understanding of those executive orders and policies, mostly about discrimination in Title IX and whistleblower, those kinds of cases. Then you can go and file a complaint or an incident report online there, and it'll be read by multiple people from counseling center, from CARES, from student conduct, from OEO, myself. And by the way, I'm currently the interim director for the Office of Equal Opportunity. I'm still the director for SSWD, but I'm the interim director for the Office of Equal Opportunity. So I oversee all of the all the complaints regarding violations from faculty and students, as well as all the religious exemption requests and a gazillion other things, but mostly it's Title IX right now. A lot of sexual harassment, sexual assaults, and stalking and things like that. That are the majority of our incident reports that we're working on right now. That are cases and we that may lead to hearings in the future. So, but Maria, basically, there are various ways that and various resources a student can go to. And so it is understandable that sometimes a student may just want to graduate or just finish up the semester and not want to rock the boat. But even after it's all over with, they still can come forward to complain, to identify that there's an issue somewhere. And if they feel safer and more comfortable doing that, then that's fine. At least they have that opportunity. But if they want us to do something proactively for them because they don't want the consequence of having been neglected and not getting what they need for class because it could impact their grade point or all sorts of other things, then they need to come to us as soon as possible so that we can work with it as proactively as possible.
May I offer something political, kind of tangential as well? I first want to say that like it might be institutionally impossible to like avoid getting singled out. Like retaliation is illegal, but not like the professor making an educated guess as to who, this kind of thing only happens because relatively few students require accommodation. So it's probably like circumstantially, impossible not to get singled out. Even though you have to like then potentially deal with like legal framework around that. But also like I fully understand like when students want to in the worst case where like accommodation is not given but was sanctioned beforehand. In the worst case, like it's understandable if a student doesn't want to rock the boat, but maybe do rock the boat. Like it's yeah, of course you don't necessarily want to individually, but that kind of thing can be extremely helpful in the long term. People rocked the boat in the most famous of like civil rights victories as well. And sometimes they felt they didn't have a choice, but other times it was just acting on behalf of a community to which they had a connection, of which they were part. So that's like, I don't know. I personally fully understand like that fear, and I have not like put my money where my mouth is here at all. But I do think it's important to like, be willing to rock the boat a bit especially when the law itself is on your side, when you're totally on the right side of the institutional policies.
I think that what you're talking about is absolutely important for all students to understand. And part of the dilemma, William, I think, is for students to feel a sense of identity. And Rian, you certainly know what I'm talking about because that's what we were trying to do last semester. The reason why people are not comfortable with quote unquote rocking the boat is because they're not really comfortable and clear, I think, with themselves, with understanding what are their rights and their and responsibilities of the institution. And once they understand all of that, then they're not really rocking the boat so much as they're maybe whistleblowing, or maybe they're basically just calling out and saying, this is not acceptable. One of the things for myself as a person who was adopted in a all-white community of able-bodied individuals is that a lot of words in my vocabulary were missing, and the same thing with females. If a female or anybody is sexually assaulted at a young age and you have not learned the vocabulary of sexual assault, you don't even know what happened. You just know that something creepy might have occurred and something that made you uncomfortable. And it might take you 20, 30 years to grow up and be around people who are more savvy on these kinds of issues to suddenly start teaching you the words that start to validate validate and explain what just happened to you back then. And I think that that's one of the issues that we are experiencing that I'm trying to change by, if you look at our website, and I know Rian said it was very basic, and it is very basic. We've been kind of busy, but it's not as fully fleshed out as I'd like to be able to expand on it, so that we teach students about disability rights as civil rights, and that the history of our rights come from civil rights, and therefore when you are fighting for your disability rights, you are fighting for your disability civil rights, which are hard earned. And these are rights that you are owed because you are a human being in the United States, where we have the ADA and we have the civil rights. In other countries, I can't speak.
Yeah, I've looked up some of the policies that other countries have, and it's pretty spotty coverage, I gotta say. Norway checks out. Norway checks out because I had to do a research project on Norway, but Canada, I don't know.
Yeah, every country, I know Japan, Scotland, Korea even, there are several other countries I'm aware of. There's more that have an equivalent to the ADA, as in disability rights for their citizens. So there are modifications of the ADA, but the United States is really a model of the ADA, but we're certainly not a model in the UN, but we are modeled in some areas. So there are some things we do right, and there's some things we do not have correct at all, as in signing off on the UN. So anyway.
We are going a little overtime.
Yep.
So if people are able to stay for like 5 more minutes, we could do a short discussion if you want, or we could end it here and bid good night.
Were you going to talk about, Rian, were you going to talk about the Payan case? Or did you
I did that at the start, actually.
Oh, you did that already?
I put a
I'm
link
sorry.
to the petition in chat.
Okay.
So hopefully people are able to access that.
So do you
Yeah,
understand
so-
the Payan situation, everybody? So
I've
the,
only learned about it tonight, I'm afraid.
okay.
That might be true for a lot of us.
So William, this goes into what you all were talking about being rock the boaters and, you know, being a little bit of a rabble rouser and all that. So here we are, it's 1990 that the ADA was signed into law, known as the Disability Rights from the 1964 Civil Rights, okay? Here it is, the year 2022. And we have gotten long past Jim Crow, which was a separate but unequal treatment, right? And so LACC has basically told these blind students that if an institution, or if we inadvertently, unintentionally don't provide for you equal access, but we provide for you something kind of similar, then we should be good. Okay. And if we were unintentional because we didn't know that this was a problem to you, then we are not subject to the ADA or Section 504 violation, which is wrong. Because the whole point of 504 and ADA is knowing that a good number of the violations that individuals with disabilities experience has been unintentional. You know, buildings were constructed before 1990, before 2010, you know, with the building code changes and ramps and elevators and the smart classrooms and all of that stuff. We know that those things exist and barriers exist all over the place. But we also know that because of the ADA, that people who are supposed to be, we've had 31 years to clean up our act. And so if there are still violations of disability rights and accesses in places, public and in any area where they receive federal funding, then they need to be held responsible. And so LACC was saying that these blind students who wanted to have access to, they were using My Math Lab, which is a specific software for a math class, which was not accessible for blind students, and the screen reader. And they said, well, what we'll do is we'll provide for you a reader, a human reader, but the human reader would have to be only available at certain hours at certain times. That's not the same. I mean, as you know, students, you study at all weird hours. You know, you need how much time to think and process, and having a human reader is not the same as having that electronic access at your fingertips and when you want to have access to it. And so that's what LACC is arguing, that if they provide you something that's kind of like that, that's good enough. And that's not what the Payan Mason case is supporting. And that is why the petition is there to say, you know what, LACC, you are wrong. You're 31 years behind the time. This is something that should have been clarified back then. This is not acceptable today.
Yeah, I'll put it like in a technical term. They're arguing for universal design rather than like, you know, accommodation that is just you know,
Yeah.
token basically.
Well, it's actually not even universal design, because I mean, quite frankly, we have not used, we've only had 2 blind students that have ever needed readers from us lately. And why? It's because the readers have to read some very technical chemistry and accounting information. But other than that, they got screen readers. They've got ability to be able to access their textbooks, and they should be able to access their videos and everything else according to when and how they want to access it, but not be dependent on a human reader who is human, needs to sleep, needs to eat, needs to not be available at all times. If you go to the link that Rion just posted with the DREDF, they have a really nice fact sheet there that really lays out super simply what is the issue and what is a why it's an issue. And then there's a petition that we are basically asking people to, if they want to sign on, because I think that they're expecting a bunch of sleeping people around here not to be aware that LACC is trying to slide by the ADA and 504 and basically say we're exempt from it, because, you know, any discrimination that students experience here is unintentional, because we don't plan to discriminate against anybody. Well, that doesn't really hold water for someone who's not able to access their curriculum, right?
Yeah, the lack of intentionality is kind of the issue, isn't it?
Exactly. That is exactly it, William. The lack of intentionality makes you no less guilty than if you intended it. You're still culpable, and the student is still not giving access to what they need, intentional or not.
Yeah, so I guess before we end it, I kind of want you to address this. So what if there's an issue with SSWD or your coordinator? What happens then?
Okay.
These are open questions, by the way. So if other people have thoughts, you can feel free to put them either in the chat, say them out loud, or continue talking about it on our social medias or the Discord server for the discussion questions.
Right. And the bottom bullet down there is the one that you probably will be most wanting to keep in mind. Obviously, the first thing will be to have a discussion with the access coordinator. If you don't agree with the access coordinator and you feel that you need to take it to another level, then that would mean coming to me, you know, or my associate director, Rasan Ellison Johnson. And then if that still is not something where, you know, you're finding it to be, you know, providing you the information and the, you know, what the support that you feel that you are entitled to based on your disability and documentation, you can take it up to the VP. Now, I will tell you though that we have had students who have gone up to the VP, and oftentimes it'll get kicked right back to us, because you may not agree that we're not going to approve you for an accommodation, but if we have explained to you our process for how we determine the accommodation, then that will be really pretty much it. So like I said, with my disabilities, it doesn't entitle me to having double time, but it may entitle me to have audio recording or note taker, you know, electronic note taker express or something like that. But there are certain accommodations that you know, would be approvable, and others that would not. For example, we have a student who wanted to have PowerPoint slides in advance of class. Now, if you know anything about faculty, oftentimes they're creating those PowerPoints right to the minute before they get into the class. So if you can get the PowerPoints after class, that's really great. And that's really what the average student gets, right? Is the PowerPoints after class. So as long as you get the PowerPoints, then you're all pretty much accessing and getting those PowerPoints. Well, this one student wants to have them before class. That's not necessarily something that's going to be approved because it's hard to hold faculty accountable for making sure that they prepared beforehand when, you know, the intent would be that all students will get it after class. We had another student who was complaining because she wanted to have exam questions given to her several days in advance so that she could respond to the questions on her own open book. And then at the time of the exam, come in with the answers. Now that's not going to happen, but she's taken it to all the different levels, you know. We have told her that if she brings in more evidence, more medical documentation that evidences that this is what's required for her specific disabilities, then we can reconsider it. But then also it's up to faculty to determine with us whether or not this would be a fundamental alteration. And faculty do have due deference under the law regarding how the curriculum is taught and assessed. So a lot of this stuff is not necessarily even up to SSWD. It really is dependent on negotiating, working with faculty to help them understand that the student has a certain kind of disability that requires a certain form of accommodation. And so, you know, they have a responsibility to ensure it. Faculty never know your diagnosis. They will know from us that you do have a specific form of disability, as in having a certain kind of accommodation. So for example, if you're approved for audio recording, we're not explaining to the faculty member what your disability is. We're explaining to the faculty member that you have a disability that requires your ability to audio record. That's all we ever share with faculty.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. That is our time. We have our official schedule on the top right if you want to screenshot it. And our next meeting is February 18th at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. We have a link to our link tree at the bottom here, as well as our email. So feel free to contact us and have a wonderful weekend.
One
Thank you for
plug. Can I
showing
make
up.
one more commercial
Oh,
plug?
one more?
Yes, yes. I want to make a commercial plug. February 14th, the convocation. Are you
Yes.
aware of that?
Oh, yes, the
I am registered.
convocation. I'm
Okay,
not sure
please
if
do.
we've signed up for anything yet, but
Yes,
it's
please do
definitely
sign
interesting.
up. Please do sign up. And if you have not signed up for my session, I would encourage you to sign up for my session. So we are I will be doing a panel presentation with Rasan and Catherine Betts from the Bias Response. And we will be 3 administrators of color that have disabilities talking about our journeys, professional and personal, as well as talking about the history that I just briefly kind of went over, but I'll go over a little bit more in depth regarding the history of the intersection of ableism and racism.
All right.
All
Well, thank
right.
you, Dr. Vance. There's
All
also
right.
unofficial like meeting, I think, going on in the interceding weeks between like now and the next Dana meeting. I forget which day that is, but yeah. But anyway, that's that. That's
Thank
been
you.
the first official meeting of Dana. We've already been outroed by Rian, so I don't know what I'm doing. But I'll just reiterate, thank you everybody for coming, and to those of you who are watching the recording later, thank you. We see those analytics, and everybody have a
Thank you, Angelique, for
everybody
bringing
do
your
if you're
lovely
able
little
to
fur
avoid
animal.
all on the screen.
His name's Shadow.